Welcome to the Oscar SSGN subbrief, Project 949. I'm Captain Jive Turkey. Today we're going to talk about the Oscar class and all of its different variants throughout the decades. My sources are here. They are all very good. I recommend you check these guys out over at... All right, our story begins in 1969 when studies began circulating around the Central Research Institute of USSR Ministry of Defense, another one of those great bureaucratic names I love from the old Soviet Union. And these studies were referring to a project or an idea of a carrier of anti-ship cruise missiles. So at this time, we're thinking, well, the Slava class has a lot of missiles. The Kirov obviously is huge. They even have Kiev, which they have cruise missiles on an aircraft carrier. So what is this carrier of anti-ship cruise missiles? Are they just going to build a ship full of these? And then alongside these studies, it was mentioned a third generation SSGN. And this got everyone's attention over in the West. This carrier of anti-ship cruise missiles was going to be submerged. That is insane. And the Russians are the perfect people to try and do this because they come up with new ideas all the time and make them work. These studies referred to defeating an American nuclear carrier group with a salvo of 20 to 24 supersonic anti-ship cruise missiles. And up to this point, the most that we had seen coming out of the Soviet Union was 12. Between 6 and 12 cruise missiles on their Echoes, and the Charlie had some SSGN capabilities. But we're talking something significantly larger here with 24 cruise missiles on one platform. So these technical documents are rotating around the halls of knowledge, basically. And in 1969, they finally come along with a technical task, which is kind of the next step in this process, to build a heavy submarine cruiser around this new Granite missile system, which is another project that's happening concurrently. So they want to take this missile that West is calling the Granite, and they're going to put it on this new submerged cruiser. They begin building shore-based test facilities for this Granite missile in 1969 and begin testing it. In 1970, the Ministry of Defense Resolution Project 949 is authorized. This officially gives the project its name and its funding, and it's going to be built in the 1970s, from 71 to 1980. It's led by P. Postentsev, and I messed that up, but that's his picture right there. He's the chief designer of the Granite missile system. So the guy that's making the missile system is now also in charge of making the delivery platform, which is going to be this submerged, large, anti-ship cruise missile platform that doesn't even have a name yet, but he's the guy in charge. He's making the weapon and he's making the launch platform. 1971, his staff goes over 100 different designs. They're thinking inside the box, outside the box. They're making new boxes. They have so many different ideas. And finally, the Presidium of Scientific and Technical Council of the Ministry of Industry of the USSR, another great name, chooses to design. They narrow it down to 2 ideas in 1971. And by 1972, this is what they chose. This is just a sketch of the technical drawing. This is what it was approved in 1972, and 3 years later, the keel is laid in Workshop 55 of Sevmas Shipyard. NATO name at this time is called Baton, based on the size and shape of the thing. They just call it a baton because we don't know what it's going to be yet until they finally decide on calling it the Oscar. Project 949 Oscar 1 ran from 1975 to 1976, and this is just the first step in a series of Oscars that have come down through the decades. So Oscar 1 had 2 hulls from 1975 to 1976, laid down in 1975, named Archangels, and was later renamed at its commissioning in 1980, or launching rather, of 1980, the Minsky Kosmolets. So the Russians do this a lot, and it can be confusing, is they change the names of their submarines and their ships regularly. And so what is the name of the ship one year may not be the same name of the ship, but it's still the same ship in following years. And that's the case here for Hull 1. Hull 2, K206, is the Murmansk. The keel is laid in 1979 and launched in 1982. And you can see I have the red pin there on where the shipyard is at. Okay, Oscar 1 specifications. She's 143 meters long and 18 meters wide. And that ratio is very thick. Width to length. She is running around like a big old rectangle, pushing the water out of the way as she moves through the ocean. She doesn't really sail like a typical ship where she cuts through the water. She, bulges her way through the water. But she displaces 22,000 tons, which is huge. That is like 3 688s roughly. It's 3 times the size of the fast attack submarines we're running at the same time here. But she can get up to speeds of greater than 30 knots. Okay, they're taking 22,000 tons of displacement and pushing it at 30 some knots. And they're doing that with 2 pressurized water reactors that are turning different screw blades at different times, but either a tandem 4-bladed screw, which is what they began with. They later went to 2 5-bladed screws to give her more speed. But she didn't just have one screw blade configuration for her whole life. Different hulls had different screw blade configurations at different times, and they changed. They were never consistent. So just know that she had a tandem 4 and a 5-blader, like you see here in the picture. Those are 2 5s, and you'd be right. Unclassified test depth is 600 meters, but I'm here to tell you it's a lot deeper than that. She has approximately 130 crewmen. The Soviets and now the Russians continue to put a lot of automation into their submarines. So they can operate these submarines with much less crewmen than Western submarines do that have less automation. So I've seen estimates as low as 96 crewmen, but officially they have approximately 130 crewmen on these. She shoots 24 SSN-19 shipwreck missiles. That's the P700 Granite. She has 4 53-centimeter torpedoes that can shoot the SSN-15 Starfish, which is basically a 40-centimeter torpedo mounted on a 53-centimeter rocket that then flies up in the air, goes a measured distance of, say 10, 15,000 yards, and then drops down again. It can even go farther than that. The 2 65-centimeter torpedo tubes shoot the SSN-16 Stallion, which is the same 40-centimeter torpedo mounted on a 65-centimeter rocket, which does the same thing but can go a lot farther because it's got a larger motor. Really cool. And they can shoot torpedoes out of those, of course, as well. But the Starfish and the Stallion give them a great standoff range. All right, so Oscar-class sensors, this is kind of a general overview of the whole thing. We'll go over specific differences later on. But for now, let's start with the Snoop Pair or Snoop Half Surface Radar. That's just your typical surface search navigation radar. Rim Hat ESM, because it looks like a little hat when it's raised up. It receives radars and whatnot, can tell them who's out there searching. Shark Gill sonar, mainframe sonar. It's a very modern sonar for the 80s, most modern that they have. Mouse Roar, special pulse sonar. This is a special thing that I got to kind of dance around here. But Mouse Roar is designed to actively transmit sonar in a special pulse that is very hard to detect. So the idea is that they could go around the ocean transmitting active sonar with this Mouse Roar, and the Americans would never hear it because it is a special pulse. And I'm sorry, I cannot go into what the special pulse is, but let me tell you that this is scary. If you hear Mouse Roar, like for real, it'll get your attention because you're like, they're out here hunting us, because they believe that we can't hear the Mouse Roar. Okay, and then the Palladium towed array is a tactical towed array, much like the TB-16. It's like a very early version of the TB-16. It's very rudiment, but it gets the job done. It's a towed array, linear array towed behind them. All right, double hull construction. Like a lot of Soviet and Russian submarines, they have twin hulls. This hull uses AK-33 steel, codenamed Prometheus. It is 68 millimeters thick, which is 2.5 inches, and there are 2 hulls of this. So it is really thick. I mean, compared to American submarines, this is so thick. It's unbelievable. But she has got a very thick hull, and she has 2 of them. Inside this very thick hull, she's got 10 internal watertight compartments where the crew can, move from one to another, and they do. She also has a reinforced sail, rudder, topside designed to punch through the ice, but she cannot shoot her missiles through the ice, but she can surface through the ice. And there's even a little door on the sail where the crew can get out and walk on the ice if they wanted to. She is under ice capable is the point. All right, so here's a picture of the missile that we've been talking about, the AK-45 Granite, known in the West as the Shipwreck, and it's very well named because, as you can see, it's a fat, powerful missile. In the case of the Oscar, she's launched at a 45-degree angle, facing towards the direction of fire. The tube is flooded before launch. She is a wet-launched weapon. The launch can be submerged. She has an unclassified range of 550 kilometers, but It's a little bit longer than that. And these missiles are special. The guy that came up with this missile was brilliant, and my hat's off to him. He's very, very smart, his whole team. These missiles do a very early version of missile-to-missile communication, and they are launched in salvos. They're designed to be launched in salvos, and the missiles know this. So after they're launched and they do their spin up and they're on their course, they ping each other to see how many there are. This is all autonomous. They then choose one missile to get up off the seafloor, because these are sea skimming missiles. This is a supersonic missile flying feet up over the water. It's hauling butt, and it's very low to the ground. But because of that, they can't see much with their radars in their nose. So they pick one missile to go up high. 1,000, 2,000, however many thousand feet, doesn't really matter. But that one missile is like the outlook. He looks for the target at the pre-designated point. Once he gets the radar picture, he can identify, the missile autonomously can identify large ships from small ships. And then it can choose, based on whatever parameters it was set at launch, to either target the small ships first with the missiles that are in the front of the pack, and then target the larger ships with the second wave, if you will, of the salvo, or vice versa. It has target discriminatory capabilities that are completely autonomous based on pre-flight programming parameters. Very, very advanced for the 1980s. This is incredible. I can't even compare it to American missiles, because that would be probably crossing some lines that I don't want to cross. But this is very good. It's fast, it's deadly, and it works as a team. Okay, the Oscar I operations in 1982, 1996. I can personally vouch for some of these areas because we were able to track them during certain times. Let's see, their headquarters at this time, all out of the Northern Fleet, which is the Kola Peninsula. That's that little peninsula to the west of the Red Pin where they're built. There's several naval bases up there. And together, those collection of naval bases are known as the Northern Fleet. She operates primarily in the Barents Sea because it's convenient, it's close. She's basically she's a test platform for future Oscars, because right from the very beginning, there were some shortcomings that they identified, even during construction. They're like, okay, we should probably change this and that in the future. So a lot of times they just go out to the Barents Sea, they do some testing, surfacing and divings, maybe some weapons test, and pull right back in. 90%, if I had to pull a number out of the air, I would say 90% of the operations are in the Barents. Then they go into the Norwegian Sea a little more often, or less often, I should say. And then there was a few patrols or missions, if you want to call them that, down to the North Atlantic, because her operational design was to go to the North Atlantic and intercept those carrier groups and destroy them. So they did venture into the North Atlantic. It just wasn't very often. They had a lot to learn with this Oscar because it was such an ambitious, out-of-the-box design that they spent a lot of the time with the Oscar 1s, that's the first two hulls, doing a lot of at-sea testing in relatively shallow water of the Barents. It's also easily protected by, the Soviet fleet, where they can do their test in privacy, or they think they're not being tracked. And so it was very convenient for them. Most of the stuff happened in the Barents. So some design characteristics that they found right away, one that was kind of a surprise, at least in the West, is she's very slow to dive. She opens up her ballast tanks to dive. They fill with water, and she just barely goes down. They have to bring on extra pumps to pump water into the variable ballast tanks inside the Oscar to give it more negative buoyancy to make it dive a little bit faster. So from a naval architecture point of view, the ballasting wasn't quite right for the Oscar 1. Also, return radius was really wide. I mean, you have an 18 meter to 150 meter ratio. That thing is like a building, and you're trying to turn it in the ocean. So she doesn't turn very well. She needs a lot of help, especially coming in and out of port. I mean, she's got tugs all over her pushing her around. So these are some of the things that they identified at sea and they wanted to fix with the next generation of Oscars, Project 949 Alpha. Upgrades begin in 1982. Some of the things that they're addressing is better equipment locations. They want to place the equipment inside the sub in a more efficient manner so there's more room for the crew and maybe more equipment. The ballasting issue is addressed through, naval architecture and math. Sound silencing, they add a lot of sound silencing to this new project. These new boats are significantly quieter than hulls 1 and 2. They did go with a 7-bladed screw, which they stayed with that choice from this point on as a fleet. Submarines from now on coming out of Russia will have a 7-bladed screw. if they're serving Russia. The ones that they sell to other countries may not have it. But the Oscars 949 Alpha, 7-bladed screws, 2 of them. They also have the crew escape capsule, which they have a public number of 110 crew can fit inside. I'm sure they can fit the entire crew inside if it was an emergency, though. All right, so here is Oscar 2 949 Alpha. The interior compartments there, you can see them. Oh, sorry about that. Anyway, construction between 1985 and 1999. Jeez. Sorry, that threw me off, guys. 154 meters long. She's a little bit longer than Oscar 1. She has another compartment, we believe. We believe that she has 10 compartments now. That 10th compartment is in the rear end, past compartment 9 there, and it houses the electric motors that can help the submarine turn and whatnot. She displaces even more weight now, 24,000 tons, because of this extra compartment, 11 more meters of steel, and all that weight displaces a total of 24,000 tons. They're planning on building 11 hulls, and they do. That goal is achieved. 7 are in the Northern Fleet at time of planning. This is going back to when they're actually doing this, 1985 to 1990. And 4 are eventually shipped over to the Pacific Fleet. We'll talk about that in a minute. To give you an idea of how quiet they are, instead of giving you a decibel number like I have been doing, I'm just going to compare it to another submarine. She is as quiet as the improved Akula when the improved Akulas were operational. So very quiet whenever she comes out of this initial sea trials. We had a hard time tracking her. She quickly identified noise offenders during sea trials so that whenever she was operational, she was extremely quiet. This is a very good submarine, the Oscar II. They did a great job with this one. They're getting better as a nation, identifying sound shorts and fixing them. And that's a great concern to us because we kind of are, as a West, from a NATO point of view, we like them being noisy. And whenever they're starting to fix their noise sound shorts, it makes us nervous. And they're getting better at it with this project. All right, so here's the 11 that they built. I'm not going to read all their names. But we will kind of go over some of these because there's an interesting timeline with a lot of these right here. But there they are. You can pause this video if you need to, but we're going to move on. Okay, the operations of the Oscar II will start in 1991. K-173 and 142 are moved to the Pacific Fleet, and 2 years later they are joined with K-420 and K-456. So those are your 4 Pacific Fleet, almost said cursed, Pacific Fleet Oscar IIs over there. In 1996, K-132 and K-456 come together in some war games, and they both shoot Granite missiles submerged, demonstrating the capability of teamwork, and they could shoot the same target with as many as 48 of these supersonic anti-ship missiles. This is a capability unlike anything we've seen from Russia before. For a submerged launch is a surprise attack that can happen 100 miles away. It can happen, less than that. There's no telling when these missiles will come out of the water at you in extreme numbers. And the idea is to overwhelm the American air defense. And they believe that with these tactics, they can do that. In 2011, it is planned that the Oscar II will receive the Onyx and the Caliber missile capability. These are the improved missiles that will be launched from the Onyx is from the missile launchers on the sides, and the Caliber is a 53-centimeter torpedo-size cruise missile. Think of it like a Tomahawk. It's similar in capability to the Tomahawk. 2013, the K-266 and K-119 launched the Granite missiles, again, as a team as well, working together. So they're practicing this capability of not just one Oscar attacking one fleet, multiple Oscars working together, simultaneous launching, overwhelming an air defense. And they're getting better at it. Now, these Northern Fleet exercises continue a year after year. They're done in the late spring, early summertime, and they're usually done in the Barents Sea. But as you can see, in 2018, they were done in the Norwegian Sea. The Russians of today are much more capable and much more confident in their ability to project their power and conduct their exercises, closer and closer to NATO allies. All right, let's talk about the Kursk tragedy real quick. See, 12th of August, year 2000, operating in the Northern Fleet annual war games, like we had talked about. 2000 was a large war game here, over 30 ships, when suddenly two explosions that happen almost simultaneously are heard on sonars, around the world, quite literally, because our SOSA system picked it up in the Atlantic. If I can talk about the explosions, the first one is a relatively small explosion that immediately ignites a large secondary explosion. And what we think that is an explosion in the torpedo room of one weapon, causing a sympathetic explosion of every other weapon in the torpedo room. If you can imagine that, it is just a huge explosion. I mean, the shockwave alone from this must have concussed the entire crew, including, obviously killing a lot of them as well. So the Kursk immediately is submerged when this happens and immediately sinks. She's in she's only in 330 feet of water, and she's 500 plus feet long. So if you were to stand her on end, a lot of the submarine would be sticking out of the water. That gives you an idea of how relatively shallow this is. We hear, and we have recordings of this, after the explosion, the reactor pumps are methodically shut down. Someone is operating the reactor after the incident. The Northern Fleet locate the Kursk because they're working together. They're already right there doing a war game, and they take station overhead. So nobody else is allowed or can get any closer without being counter detected at this point. But we hear on our sonar systems metallic hammering coming from the Kursk. And we're like, obviously there's some survivors there because they're trying to communicate in the only means that you can do at this point, and that's by taking a metal object and pounding it on the metal hull. So the next day, 13th of August, the hammering stops, and that's very ominous for everybody because we think that that's the day that the rest of the crew may have run out of air. Again, at this point, nobody knows even what caused this. There's a lot of confusion, but everybody, including the NATO people, we all want to get in there and help them save this crew. But for right now, Russia's like, no, we got this. And on the 14th of August, they announced that they have rescue craft named Kolokol is feeding power and oxygen to the Kursk. This turns out to be propaganda, and in my opinion, I think it's just a lie. They just made that up. There was rescue craft overhead, but they were not connected to anything. And what they did the following day from the rescue craft, this is a Russian rescue craft, by the way, not Norwegian or any other nation. They send down the equivalent of a diving bell, which is designed to dock with the, escape trunks or hatches rather of these Soviet submarines. But because of the sea state is so high, they can't get a good seal, and they try for 2 days and they just can't get it to dock. And then, almost a week later, the chief of staff of the Russian Northern Fleet, Mikhail Mostak, announces that the Kursk is flooded, the crew is dead, there are no survivors. But we have evidence. When I say we, I mean NATO recordings that I have seen myself of the Kursk survivors hammering on the hull, and the explosion for a day and a half after the event. It's very sad. All right, some other Oscar II mishaps. Doesn't stop with the Kursk in the year 2000. In 2001, K-119 undergoes a 2-year dry dock period. This is completely unscheduled. We're not sure what happened, but we do know that her port shaft begins making a lot of noise. There's something happened to the port side of that engine room. It was unlikely to be a collision or anything, but it could have been lack of maintenance. It could have been some kind of over throttle, over stress, but something stressed the port side of the drivetrain to the point that it was immediately noticeable. Like every time I went to see it, made so much noise. There was like no point in even submerging because you could hear K119 for miles and miles. There was something wrong with the port side. So whenever she did go to sea, you'd see her running around on one screw a lot of the times, the starboard side only. And that's how she operated when she was at sea, which was not often. So they finally, after she comes out of, dock and does some sea trials, she goes back into dock in 2006 for what they call emergency repairs to the port main turbine. So they're finally going to do that. And in order to do that, they have to rip the whole engine room apart practically. And they go ahead and they refuel her while they're doing that, since they have her in dry dock for a long period of time. She's then sent back to sea trials a couple years later, like 2008. And she has some other problems that I'm not even sure of what they are, but she has to be dry docked a third time in 2009 for technical readiness restoration, which tells us over here in the West that she was never tactically ready since 2001, and maybe even longer than that. K119, every class of ship has kind of a black sheep of the family, and this is kind of that ship. Out of all the Oscar IIs, K119 is the unlucky ship. And speaking of unlucky ships, they had a lot of fires recently, 2013, 14, 15, K150. These Oscars are going through their midlife upgrades at this point, or just regular maintenance that require dry docking, and they're catching on fire. So 150 had a fire, 2014, 148 had a fire. Now, K148 was already decommissioned, so they didn't lose any operational capability there, but still, a fire at any point is not good. And then K266 catches fire pierside, and that's a little bit important because she was actually going through her modernization to Project 949AM. So let's talk about Project 949AM. There's a caveat here. Right now, there's 3 hulls planned. They probably are going to do more, but right now I can give you 3 names that they're going to upgrade from 949A to the modernization package. The first is K132, and that's already done. She is good to go. She had a delay in 2017, but it's been 2 years, and she's operational now. And what this does, the big improvement here, is the launchers that are on the port and starboard side, those 24 missile tubes, shoot the new ANCS anti-ship missile. And we saw in Syria, 2016, I think it was, that this ANCS missile does have land attack capability, which kind of took everybody off guard. The ANCS is designed to be an anti-ship missile, but they shot it over Syria, so it hit something over there. Also, the Caliber missile we saw in Syria, it's a Tomahawk ski, we call it, Tomahawk capable missile. Obviously, it's a land attack missile. There is probably a anti-ship version of the Caliber, but we just haven't seen that yet. If you can attack a land target with a missile, you can easily modify it to attack a ship as well. So it has the ANCS for the launchers that go up and down the sides, and the Caliber missile comes out of the 53 centimeter torpedo tubes in the front. And she can ripple fire these torpedo tubes now. So she can launch the Calibers one after the other, as she's also shooting the ANCS missiles, or Onyx missiles, from her port and starboard sides. A big capability. It's a huge boost. This project was paid for and commissioned in 2012. Modernization began immediately. One of the nice things that they added was a camera for the crew in the escape pod. So if they ever do need to use the escape pod, as they bob around waiting for rescue, they can at least see the surface. That gives them peace of mind. It's a big morale booster adding that. I think that was a concession for what happened to the Curse. They're like, give the guys something, and this is what they gave them. Propulsion systems are identical to the Oscar II. That's 90% true. I'll go over that at the end. They added bow thrusters. I wasn't able to find a picture for you, but they have bow thrusters now on the front to help its maneuvering at low speeds. It's a 6-bladed bow thruster. I'm sure it's really noisy. It's only going to be used to operate import. I don't think they would ever use it at sea. The torpedo room holds 28 weapons. It could be 28 torpedoes. It could be 28 Caliber missiles. It can be a mixture of those in between, but just know that it holds 28 weapons in the tube, 24 missiles in the missile launchers along the sides. So a lot of weapons on this thing. Various systems are modernized. Oh yeah, they gutted the interior and gave it new radios, new ship control systems. A lot of the electronics is all upgraded and brand new, and that's really what the M stands for, is modernization of the interior components. The reactor did receive a 30% cooling upgrade, so it can theoretically run at a higher temperature, and that would mean it's making more steam, but they still have the same turbine generators. So they're still making 190 megawatts, which is still, it's a lot of power, but just because they make more steam doesn't mean they can make more power. Now, that does mean that they can take more steam and move it to the main engines, which is how they turn the screw. But without upgrading the main engines to be able to handle more steam, they would not be able to do that reliably for a long period of time without breaking something. So the reactor has more cooling power. They can make more steam. They may not be able to use it. But another benefit of this is that it's a little bit safer. Running the reactor with more cooling is always good. So good for them for doing that. They did a lot of sound silencing changes and upgrades. These things are even quieter than the improved Akula, in my opinion, at this point. And as long as they maintain them, they will stay very quiet. And that's the key. Historically, Russian submarines, after 18 months, that seems to be the magic number, become noisy again. And just, once it's a year and a half old without a refit, it's going to be easier to detect. But that first 18 months is scary because these things are like shadows. Very, very quiet. Okay, so of the three planned, we have the K-132 is operational. K-442 is not confirmed to be operational yet. I couldn't find any confirmation. And K-266 is one of those submarines that had a fire in the shipyard. That was in 2015, and it delayed this upgrade so much that it's still not done. So that fire was significant. They're moving on with the modernization. They haven't stopped, but it's not finished yet, 4 years later. All right, and here's kind of an extra for you guys. It is not an Oscar, but it is based on the Oscar hull. They took an Oscar II hull and modified it. It has its own project number, which means it's going to have its own lecture in the future, but I thought I'd bring it up now so that I don't get questions about this. The Belgorod is Project 985. It's 9852, technically. It's basically they took an unused Oscar II that they, I guess, we're not going to build for budget reasons or whatnot, and they modified it significantly. It's shorter than an Oscar II. It's narrower than Oscar II. Instead of being 18 meters wide, it's only 15 meters wide, and it's pier side right now. One of the capabilities that this thing has is it can shoot the Canyon nuclear power autonomous torpedo. This is what a lot of the media call the Doomsday Weapon. It is a nuclear powered, long range, autonomously driven by itself nuclear weapon that can go anywhere in the world that there's an ocean and detonate. And the idea is to, cause a tsunami essentially and wipe out a coastal city and port facilities and whatnot with this weapon. This can also be a dirty bomb if they use cobalt instead of uranium in the warhead, which can be done. It's unlikely that will ever be done. But if they use cobalt, that would significantly contaminate the region of the explosion for greater than 100 years easily. And it's going to be much more than that. So this can be a very, very nasty weapon. So the Belgorod will get its own lecture in the future when we know more about it. But know that this did use originally an Oscar II hull. And as soon as we can find out more, we'll talk more about it. All right.